Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I've got my friend Louis Shulman here. Good to see you, Louis. And I'm going to start off with something that I'm personally very interested in, as I often do on the show. It's all about personal learnings. So you guys have 13,000 subscribers on a YouTube channel for your marketing agency. How did that happen? Walk me through it.
Yeah, I think there's a number of interesting lessons to be taken from how we got there. And I'll tell the shortest version of the story that I can, and if you want me to expand on it, I can. I've had this YouTube channel for probably about 5 years now, and it was originally a podcast in terms of like what was this YouTube channel created for. A weekly interview podcast that I started my junior year of college with a friend named Kyle, and we did a weekly podcast for a long time. And to some extent, we've published nonstop since then. About a year ago, I rebranded the podcast to be part of the agency. So I technically, we have a contract. I sold it to the agency because Kyle's not involved with the agency. And so I sold it from kind of myself to myself with different, business partners. And how it grew, obviously, I think there have been a few episodes I ran ads for, and for very specific reasons, which I can get into. But in terms of net subscribers, I don't think that drove more than 100 of the 13,000 or so. So maybe $20 in ad spend. So nothing really that's driving anything meaningful here. The thing about podcasts is you get a lot of organic SEO traffic if the people you interview aren't, A-list, let's say. If there's still someone who runs a business that maybe is getting, hundreds of site visitors a month so people look up the founder, or maybe it's someone who's running cold email. So these people who are very successful and are doing a lot of business, but are not your A-list celebrities like, Shaquille O'Neal or Gary Vee, there's a very high chance that your podcast will rank for their names. And so we still get tons of organic views, and a percentage of those people obviously convert into subscribers. But the most viral growth event was about 2 years ago. I had maybe 3 now, someone sent me a cold email offering to make clips for the podcast for free. And at the time, I already had an agency that was making clips for us, but I had a separate idea I wanted to try. And this is what I was getting at with the lesson I think is interesting here. And I've never had very many of the true A-list type podcast guests on the show in the past couple of years, like your Gary V's, like your Alex Hormozzi's, like your Russell Brunson's. And I was like, well, I was doing an exercise of who do the people that listen to my show, who's my avatar? What do they like? And it's well, they like these people. And so what content would they be interested in? They'd just be interested in more of this content, and Shark Tank as well as an example. So I just figured I don't need to actually have these people on the show to publish content of them. And this is not, I didn't invent the strategy. I feel like I sort of derived it from first principles rather than seeing someone else do it and deciding to copy it. But I just started publishing clips of those people. And so I had this editor. I said, don't make clips for me, make clips of these other people that my target audience would care more about. And I don't know what else happened that was in their favor, but within the first 3 of the clips, several of them went mega viral. I had the Barbara Corcoran clip get 5 million views. I had an Alex Hormozzi clip get 2 million views. And then at the same time, a friend of mine who I had on the show, actually, one of his clips, just because the channel was so hot, that clip went to 1.8 million views. And so whatever conversion rates, I think that Barbara clip brought in probably 3,000 subscribers just from that one 45-second clip. The Hormozzi clip brought in a few, and then we had probably a dozen or so others that got between 50,000 and 500,000 views. And then eventually I had to take all those clips down because that made the channel ineligible for monetization because the content wasn't original enough. But we were close enough to the other milestones that just shortly later we did actually become eligible for monetization. And then when I rebranded, it's just nice to have the, I guess you could call it, perceived credibility of that many subscribers. And it does still grow, just not by nearly the same volume that it did in that brief period of time.
That's funny. I love those hacks that kind of let you you piggyback on somebody else's name. I was just talking about this on this show a few weeks ago with another guest about the strategy of for podcasters, doing book reviews is one way, or author reviews, or reviewing a blog post that someone else wrote and just summarizing it and talking about it. It's one way to kind of piggyback off of this well-known name, even though you don't have them on your show. And so again, there's other ways kind of similar, but I like that approach. That's interesting. You've had a couple different iterations of the podcast, and obviously you mentioned kind of the whole merging into the business, or selling it to your own business. What do you like about this medium? Because you agreed to come on this today, so I assume you're out here doing shows somewhat regularly. What's interesting about podcasting to you?
I think the main reason I've been successful with sustaining doing it, right, success as measured by continuing to show up, not by outcomes, is I do just, like conversations. That's why I chose to start a podcast. I started, there's different waves of like, you can claim you're early to podcasting. I'm somewhat early in this wave-ish. And it's because myself and Kyle, like a lot of how we became friends and what we like enjoyed talking about most was like the podcast that we were listening to. We both went to the University of Alabama. I still have this cup right here with the little Roll Tide on it. And that school definitely has, it's 40,000 students, so I don't want to make any simplifications about it, but it's not known, and, the reputation's improving, but it's a football school, right? It's a party school, it's a football school, it's a sports school, and a lot of people come from, in-state for that reason. A lot of people come from out of state to study engineering, and they have scholarships and things like that. But the point is, on campus, it's the odds as compared to like a smaller school that's more like traditionally elite and academically elite, your odds of bumping into those like-minded people, they're there, but it's not one out of every 2 people you meet, maybe it's 1 out of every 10. And so Kyle and I, when we first connected and kind of found we had the similar intellectual and business interests, hit it off immediately. And always would be talking about these podcasts. And it felt like the people that we wanted to, that we were always talking about, you mentioned blogs, like we loved the same blogs as well. All those people felt inaccessible to us in terms of like, we liked talking to each other about it, but we had that eagerness to like actually talk to the person. And podcasting was the avenue to get there. And to some extent, that's not really changed. Like I'm still love reading, interesting Twitter accounts, interesting LinkedIn posts. And that's where most of my sourcing of guests come is like, I encounter something interesting. I want to talk to the person behind the interesting thing. Like it is not enough. I'm not satisfied by just reading their work. And that hasn't left me as a interest, right? And I have continued to need to learn things to go to the next step in my career. And it's always kind of the first step in my playbook is to go reach out to some experts and talk to them. And then the podcast, again, to the point of accessibility, is kind of undefeated in how much access you can get, how easily. So we were talking before we got started, a lot of what I'm still working on is getting, sales and marketing is going well, but it could always be more consistent, more predictable, more scientific, where it's like, I just know $10,000 is going to get 20 meetings and it's going to like whatever. So that's the goal. So that's been what I've been learning the past, let's say, year and a half, is like been the number one focus for me in the business, is growing our own sales and marketing to be a lot more predictable and less referral driven. And so I've just been interviewing a ton of experts about sales and marketing. And as I'm sure you know, that's sales and marketing are extremely broad topics. Like there's the lead generation, there's the top of funnel, the middle of the funnel, and then there's like, you can go very, very deep on each of those. And so I've not ran out of like things I need to learn and improve.
That rabbit hole goes on forever. It's funny you mentioned the thing about Alabama. I grew up in Memphis and then went to University of Tennessee and felt very similarly. I was like I was in the boom of like Facebook going public while I was in college. So that was the big thing. And so for people in my generation, that was the startup sort of story we were looking at. And I remember like being like, man, I want to be in an environment where I'm surrounded by people doing these kind of cool, big, ambitious things. Like, but I didn't have the sort of financial ability or resources to go to California to go to Stanford or whatever, right? So I had a similar experience where I had to kind of like build those connections a little bit. But the internet, I will say, is like you said with podcasting or whatever your medium is, it's possible to go find 10 people who've done something really interesting that you want to replicate and just talk to them. Like they'll do it. That's like the first thing I do now whenever I have a new business challenge. Like we're putting a CEO in place at one of our companies. So I went and talked to 10 entrepreneurs last quarter who had put a CEO in place at one of their companies. What happened? What worked? What didn't? Like super interesting conversations, ton of experience. And then, I can distill that down into like 5 or 10 things that really stood out as like these work and these don't. And then it's like, there's my playbook. And it's probably not the only way to make decisions. There's other ways. You can read books, you can do academic studies, you can look at data, but it definitely helps me. And so I'm right there with you as far as like this podcast gives me that same outlet. I get to ask agency owners what works for you and sort of steal the best of the best and ignore the rest. Let's talk about your business. I love your podcasting approach and what you guys did there, and then how it's still going with the company. You do some good stuff, but you've got 3 things going right now. So give me a walkthrough of like how you got into this with Orbit marketing, Orbit metrics, and Orbit flows, and what all of them do, and kind of lay the landscape for us.
Yeah. So I have 2 business partners, and we're each, I say, the primary on one of the 3 businesses. So Sean really runs all things Orbit metrics, and then Ethan runs all things Orbit flows, and one admin team for everything, and then a number of shared resources. So all of the content marketing for the other 2 businesses is, of course, done by the content marketing agency, and to some extent, vice versa. The super abbreviated story is, so I graduated college May of 2021. I started working at Bitcoin Magazine in August of 2021 in Nashville, actually in person in Tennessee. And then I left that soon after to work for Anthony Pompliano, hybrid / out of Miami. And then while I was working there, Sean had started Orbit Metrics as a part-time thing, just on the side. And that core offer, which hasn't changed dramatically, maybe it's expanded, was building analytics dashboards for people. So when you're doing performance marketing and your ad spend reaches a certain threshold or complexity, a lot of the off-the-shelf tools don't work for you so well anymore. Likewise, a spreadsheet starts to break and slow down your computer once you get more than 10,000 rows. And you also don't want to be using Zapier as a real ETL. You want to use like a real ETL, which stands for extract, transform, and load, moving data from one platform into another. And so Sean was building these custom analytics dashboards. He was planning to go full time with it, but then he kind of put out a Hail Mary job application for like a dream job and then like kind of got it. So then he didn't want to not take that job. So then agency was making decent money and he basically asked me if I wanted to help grow it for maybe the first year or so at his dream job. And then eventually, hopefully I would take it to the point where it could support 2 full-time people rather than 1. And so I left my job to just help grow that business. And I've known Sean since I was 10. We're from the same hometown, so there's a lot of like trust and familiarity there. And we'd also been involved in a different startup in the past that went, so we had like, and that didn't go well, but everything was good. Like the interpersonal side went really well through a very bad business situation, which was kind of a good stress test. And so we were running Orbit Metrics for a long time. And around March of 2023, we got some inquiries to do custom AI development because that was just kind of hot. Everyone's like, oh, I like ChatGPT, but it doesn't do XYZ. It doesn't have my data. It doesn't do this. And so people started asking us because we just had a reputation for being good at software. You know, a lot of people lump that together, just like anything technical. They're like, something technical, and I know you. And we decided to take on one of those projects. And that's when I recruited Ethan to like sub out that contract because I knew he was one of the few people I knew into Gen AI like 2 or 3 years before ChatGPT came out. His story is that he thinks he was one of the first 100 people to use ChatGPT because like he was in Europe on his honeymoon when he got the email that like the very first version of the whatever was released, and like he like disappeared into the hole for like 6 hours on his honeymoon. And his wife's like, what are you doing? We're on our honeymoon. And he's like, the computers can talk now. I'm busy. And so we brought him in to do that custom AI work. We briefly flirted with the custom AI automation agency in addition to doing the data and analytics. We quickly shut that down because we felt like we were building things that were very quickly obsolete. And what we decided to do instead, and also we were just building such a variety of applications that there was no real accrual in the work that we were doing. And what we decided to do was focus internally on building like one really good AI use case. And then doing kind of Wizard of Oz is like a term that we didn't invent, but it basically means, you know, people don't have to know what's going on behind the curtain. So we can say it's AI, but if it breaks, we can just fix it and it doesn't really matter because they're paying for the thing, not for the tool. They're paying for the outcome, not the process behind the machines. And so we decided that newsletters would be a good one. It's something that, and this was, I'd call it September of 2023. We call it the September Scramble. This is kind of when like a bunch of like things collapsed and we overextend ourselves and made a lot of beginner mistakes all at the same time. And we basically locked ourselves in a room for like a month to try to figure out our way out of this crisis. And what we decided was to build a done-for-you newsletter agency. Orbit Metrics is still a really good business. We have really good retention. The services, like it's not something we can do inexpensively and people recognize that. And so they're willing to pay for it. But it's all referrals, very slow sales cycles. It's kind of hard to like force someone to, not force, but to persuade someone to like make an investment in IT until they decide it's time. And so we felt very out of control of that business growth. Where at the same time, we were in a lot of mastermind communities for people doing like marketing services or lead gen. And it felt like from the outside that the grass was much greener, at least from a customer acquisition perspective. The data work, we can never really delegate as easily, or again, to hire a data person is a lot more expensive than hiring, let's say, a writer. So we just weren't mature enough to scale that business. And so we launched Orbit Marketing, which was at the time called Inbox Ghosts. Like, what's the simplest possible marketing service that we could sell for an inexpensive price and probably use AI to help with the operations being efficient? And so we chose weekly newsletters as that beachhead. And a lot of why I touched on the earlier experience I had with like Bitcoin Magazine and Anthony Pompliano is those are both two businesses that are very, very active on email, right? Anthony is one of the most popular personal finance Substacks on Substack, and Bitcoin Magazine obviously is a publisher, so content, email, blogs is like a lot of their entire ecosystem. And the one other important plot point was we had been running Orbit metrics for a very long time. And like I mentioned, sales was kind of a big struggle for us. And I always felt like I was stuck in that feast or famine. Like, let me just get the next sale. I can't work on anything long-term because I just need to get another customer so we can stay live. And I had wanted to start a newsletter for, since day one. And I just never did, despite myself in college having a personal Substack for like 52 weeks and like having every deep belief about how useful and powerful they were. And yet I still neglected it. So I figured that was a common kind of psychographic situation for a lot of business owners. And so we just immediately started that business, kind of got a lot of customers quite quickly, mostly because our prices were really low, and started building up our book of case studies and our confidence and things like that. And then also in parallel from day one, started building kind of a clunky internal system of automations and things like that to assist with the writing as much as possible. Once we reached a level of maturity, I'd say financially, where we could hire writers to do everything for us rather than myself and Ethan actually doing all of the writing in the early days, Ethan just went on full time to just building the tools and software to make the writers as efficient and powerful as possible. And then however many months later, that reached a level of sophistication where it was something we can release publicly and make it accessible to anyone as a, hey, we're still happy to write your newsletter for you, but here's the tools that we would use if you don't want a done for you service, you want to do it yourself service, here's Orbit Flows. And so that's started, we got our first beta customers for that. And so we're recording this April of 2025. We got our first beta customers in like January of this year. And then after, several successful beta activations, we decided we can start talking about this thing a bit more publicly.
Yeah. Louis, this is so cool. I mean, you guys have covered a lot of ground in 4 years or whatever it is, I guess we're right about 4.5 years. I'm curious, like, for you personally, what's the big vision? Like it's like, I'm trying to understand, like, do you just want to be an entrepreneur and you're figuring out, like month by month, year by year, where's the best opportunity to do that? Or is all this like leading towards one big grand vision you've already got, like still working on that? Like, I'm curious, like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I'll give two answers here. The first, Sean has a really clear vision of what he wants, and that's been really helpful. A lot of it was, and I still to some extent am in a little bit of this like messy middle territory, where when I was in college and I had, some engineering jobs where I didn't feel like I had a lot of flexibility or a lot of control over both like lifestyle and income. I was like, hey, if I'm really good at my job and get it done in half the time, can I work half time this week? And it was not an environment that worked that way. And so I was like, okay, you don't have to. Like, I'm not going to try to change you. I'll just go do something else. I don't want to say anything negative about that company. It's a great place to work. It's just they're not flexible about that type of situation, or at least they weren't at the time. And so I just had a very strong desire to be, self-sufficient, self-employed, run my own business more from like a freedom and control. Like if I've got everything done this week, I can just, sleep in. I think I've also been someone always who just needs like a lot of sleep to feel well. And like, that's a very random comment, but just like practically, like if you are someone who needs a lot of sleep to feel well and you have a full-time job and you want to go to the gym, like there's just no time whatsoever. And so I don't know why, like I don't want to say the word afflicted, but like that's just been a thing in my life where I just feel very terrible without good sleep. And so if you're like working full-time in a traditional way where you don't have, like you have a commute and like you have to, and lunch doesn't, like you can't get any of that and laundry and like chore, like you can't get any double time. You just like have very little time to live. And so a lot of those motivations were just to like get to a point of like viability, self-sustainability, and then also the remote thing as well. Like I love visiting family and things like that. And without that counting as like limited vacation time. So some very basic things like that motivated me to get to where I am now. And so now I've kind of achieved that and had that for a little bit in time. Like I haven't had as clear of like the what next vision. And besides, just like being healthy and making this have some margin for error rather than just like, okay, well, like I let's make up a number. Let's say it's $5,000 a month. I've had that once, right? Great. Okay. But like, what if someone sneezes or like we have tariffs or there's some whatever, like there's a shakeup in the world and now I don't have that and I'm back to square one. So a lot of it's just been building some buffer around that initial like milestone. And then I've been to some extent in that like place of uncertainty around like what the crystal clear next vision is. A lot of it is more personal. It's like, I sacrificed a lot of like fun and like going crazy, not like going crazy, but like I've just mostly worked a lot to get this far. And so I think a lot of the next step is just continue to survive at this stage with more comfort, with more buffer, and then work, maybe like invest a bit more heavily in my personal life in terms of like dating and relationships and things like that. Because a lot of that just was on the side while working so much the first couple of years to get the business this far. And then kind of from there, figure out what's next. And I will say, the people listening, I've heard from people, the amount of money to live comfortably single is not the amount of money to live comfortably not single. So I think that'll kind of provide some very quick motivation for the next step once that kind of enters the picture. Sean's picture, which I'll share. And so I say that like it's nice for him to lead the rest of the company in that vision respect where he's already in a committed relationship and he's getting married in like, I don't know, 4, maybe 8 weeks. And so he has all that in place. And so his vision, and which has always been, and that's why he named the company Orbit, is he wants to do space things. So that's why the Orbit behind me is kind of space themed and everything's space themed. Is Sean wants to do like self-funded R&D for like advanced space biomedical systems. Like there's a lot of unique healthcare considerations for like astronauts when they're actually in space. And so Sean, all of this is kind of building towards that, like building, also lifelong wanted to be an entrepreneur, run his own business and everything like that, but specifically to do kind of self-funded R&D for these biomedical space applications. And the path for getting there, again, of what you discuss from podcasting, what I discuss from podcasting is in playbooks that we've kind of discussed, because again, I've known Sean my whole life really, is we call it services to software, then software to space has kind of been like the motto. Or services are like the level one. I interviewed Nick Huber a few weeks ago, the sweaty startup guy, and he talked about level one in-person businesses, which are like move something, clean something, fix something, right? That's like a level, like move boxes, store boxes, fix cars, whatever. And I think of like the service or online, it's, do something or provide a deliverable, write something, design something, code something, like that's the service. And then the product, and again, I did computer science in school. Sean and Ethan both did electrical engineering, and Ethan's homeschooled and learned how to code when he was 9. And that's true. Like that's, a lot of people think that's an exaggeration. Like he actually just doesn't, like he just homeschooled and just learned how to code when he was 9. And his his first software company was like 14 and still running, which is why we've had a lot of like flexibility in having him on the team. But I was getting somewhere with the vision. So Sean wants to, the service business is what enabled us to pay for Ethan to like build software for a year with it making no income, right? It's like we have an agency with enough free cash flow for this person to do absolutely nothing towards that business. So we're like basically our own angels, if you want to call it, on that. And then the software, now that started to pick up, right, we could get 1,000 customers overnight and there'd be no issue because of software. And then that's what hopefully leads to the, space money.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm going to double down on this point because this is something that I come from. My first few jobs were in more venture funded tech. And the line of thinking for a lot of founders there is, I don't want to go start an agency or service business because that's not repeatable. It's not scalable. They just kind of like poo-poo it and like instead would rather raise money, give up over half their equity in the company to investors and, go for broke, essentially, like go big or go home. I think, again, that path works sometimes and it's fine if you want to go that way. But there is another path here. And that's kind of where you guys are doing, which is let's make our level one business some kind of service that we know we can execute on and hopefully find a way to make it repeatable enough that we can step away. It buys us essentially time freedom, which is super, in my opinion, like the most valuable thing you can buy as an entrepreneur, but buys you a degree of time freedom that a normal job won't, and cash flow that ideally lets you fund whatever that next thing is for you. So it's, for me, it's buying other agencies. For you guys, it's building products. Like there's lots of ways you can go. And it's, to me, that's that you guys are on that threshold right here where it really is important that you have a big vision at this point, because you don't want to get stuck there with time freedom. Like, once you have infinite time and infinite money, it's almost a dangerous thing, right? You can either like fall into a spiral of like just doing terrible things to yourself and like getting very bored and depressed, or you can kind of go make something really big out of this. So it sounds like you're on that path, which is really fun. So good on you. It'd be cool to see how that goes.
It's exactly right. The vision now is I still feel like I can't, we can discuss whatever implications of this, but the newsletter agency is good. It's done very well, but it's not at a point where I feel like I can step away from it and say like, okay, we finished the services chapter and now it's time to start the software chapter. Like I just, did set some intermediate milestones for how far I think I need to take the agency before. Because I think as a pattern for entrepreneurs, like if you're serially restarting things before they're done, like that's just not a personality trait I want to have, I think, if that makes sense, or not a character trait is the better word. And again, the software is showing promise. I think it's really good. I think it's exciting. I'm just not ready to like say, okay, great, getting this agency maybe a third of where I thought I wanted it to take it. I'm just going to stop here. Like I've spent so much time again learning these skills and trying to like solve these challenges professionally that I want to finish doing them before I'm like ready to divest completely and just say, great, that was a useful endeavor. And then to the same thing, like I don't know if you're familiar with Gray McKenzie. He is from Zen Pilot, and I interviewed him maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, and he talked about how they shut down their agency to run Zen Pilot. And I kind of asked him a question that's like, which was like a coaching business for agencies and their operations. And I asked him a question that was like, why, if you're so good at like teaching agencies to how to do operations, did you have to shut down your agency to launch this other business? Like if it's healthy, like couldn't you have just had that still running? And there's obviously an argument for focus. And he basically said, if I'm where I am now, I would have kept it running because like of how good we've gotten. But at the time, I don't know, just like we just wanted to like go all in.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of a threshold I want to get to with these businesses where it's like, let's get them to a point of self-sustaining growth before just like moving on to the software. Again, if suddenly the software is doing 30, 50, like some massive multiple of the other businesses where it is objectively like stupid to do anything but the thing that's just doing like orders of magnitude higher impact. But until then, I want to see these things through. And I think they're also very aligned, right? It's like, it's copywriting software is like the simplest way to describe what Flows does. And having a copywriting agency, there's a lot of back and forth.
Totally, yeah. And it gives you new experience as an operator that then you can use at the next level. So again, I'll give you a personal example. Like growing draft.dev quickly was, for me, like my intro business, my first time doing it, and going through that and putting managers in place and figuring out how to hire salespeople were all extremely useful skills for when we bought our second company a couple of years later that like, again, I had to kind of go back to a couple steps and start that process back over. And now we've got a salesperson there and some managers there that are running things. And like, it's now become something I've done twice at least. I'm not going to say I'm good at it yet. Like, I think that would be naive, right, to say you've done something twice and now you think you're great. I think it's more of like, okay, there's another rep. And we talk about this, my business partner and I, a lot about really the appreciating the value in getting reps into really hard things. Most people look at a really hard thing and they just kind of think, oh, I just want to do that once and never do it again. I look at it and like, how do I make that hard thing something I just do in my sleep? Like, it's just easy for me and I can just like move on to other stuff, but I want to get a few reps in. I don't want to just do it once and say it's over. So I think again, everybody's got different goals, but I agree with you there that there is value in kind of taking things to a logical finish or a place where you wanted to get them before you move on to the next thing and keeping that focus for sure. Let's talk about newsletters because this is kind of a tactical thing, but this show, obviously, like we talk to agency owners who are doing tactical things to grow their businesses. I love newsletters as a medium. Like, what's your draw to it? What do you like about them? What's exciting about that medium to you?
Yeah, I think I put out a LinkedIn post on New Year's Day this year that was like, no one's New Year's resolution is to spend more time on social media as a consumer. Some people might have a New Year's resolution to create more for social media, and that makes sense, right? That's tied to some other probably productive goal of like making more money, getting more leads, etc., increasing your perceived status. So like having, for example, a lot of social followers makes your DM response rate significantly higher, and that is a very useful business asset or life asset. Let's say there's like a number of things you could parlay that into, but no one's like, I want to spend more time reading LinkedIn posts. I want to read more tweets this year than I read last year. And so I think like as a medium, newsletters are just better for both the person writing them. Like if we think about like our brains, not like a neuroscience way, but I think like books, right? There's like a term called slow dopamine. I didn't invent it, which is like, again, there's like this hierarchy of like the dopamine hit. And there's why like cheap dopamine is like, again, the quick hits of tweets. I think ideally I'd read no newsletters and just read books, but there's like some level of, newness of information that is advantageous. But like who is, the work, you've heard the expression, like the work works on you more than you work on it. It's like, I think if I write more if in a year I write 50 really good newsletters or I write 500 tweets, I think like I thought better thoughts. Like just to write something 1,000 words, it's just, there's no effort. Like there's an art to writing a good tweet, right? But like, it's like a game. And I just don't think that the prize for the game is very rewarding versus like, let me sit down once a week and write one really thoughtful essay. And not every newsletter is essay format, right? But and there's a lot of like dynamics at play here because newsletters are so infinite. I got into newsletters for a couple of reasons. One was in my freshman year of college, I got super into Cal Newport and his work. I was like, want to get good grades. Obviously, I still want to like sleep a lot. We've covered this. I want to get good grades. I want to sleep a lot. I want to have fun. So I stumbled onto the productivity literature, which got me on Cal Newport, got me fully off social media for effectively all of college until I started the podcast, in which then I wanted to have social media to promote the podcast and kind of got sucked back into the dark world of social media. But so I got all of my news consumption, all of my media consumption for like 3 years of college was all from newsletters. Because I got into the productivity world, which got me on some good newsletters and email lists. And I just became really, really into the medium. And I started to, we all kind of pick our role models just based on who's visible in front of us. And so that was kind of a lot of the archetype of people I was looking up to. Is like, well, the people at these jobs I've had aren't necessarily who I want to be exactly like. I want a different lifestyle than they have. But these people writing these newsletters seem to like to sell stuff online and make money. And also specifically, when they launch products, they seem to hit very quickly because they have a huge distribution list. So all those things kind of came to realization for me, which is also a lot of the motivation for why I started the podcast originally, was like, let me have, network, audience, etc. So that when I do have a business that actually makes sense to start, I'll have a couple of advantages in some various ways, right? The world's not fair. It never has been, never is going to be. So I might as well start trying to like get ahead in whatever ways I can. And then so I just love the format. And then I started a newsletter because of the scalable reach of it, meaning, there's a lot of people I met who like thought I was doing interesting things and said like, oh, keep me in touch with your life or whatever. Just like people wanted to keep in touch. And it didn't, maybe I'm naive, but it didn't feel empty. Like it didn't feel disingenuous, like the people I'd hear that from, especially like friends and family. And at a certain point, we all quickly bump into like the actual difficulty of keeping a lot of people, like maintaining contact with a lot of people. And so newsletter is just a very scalable format to send something. Also a big believer in how much we learn from writing. Like I think like writing is thinking. There's no thing about that. So it's like the more time you spend thinking, the better your brain's going to be. And like that is the number one professional skill if you're not a widget cranker, is to like think good thoughts and think clear thoughts. It's kind of one of those like, and I don't mean to go on a total rant here, but when people say like they're bad at taking tests or like say they're bad at writing, I'm like, to me, saying you're bad at writing is telling me that you're stupid. Like I don't have either you're stupid or lazy. And like, I mean that, like truthfully, you can say you don't like writing, like it's not fun for you. That's fine. That doesn't mean you're stupid. Like it's not always pleasant to do math either. Like, but it just means like you're bad at thinking or you're bad at expressing your thoughts. And like, that is probably the most important skill in knowledge work, is like knowledge and brain power and the ability to take ideas between heads, and writing's like the best way to do it. So I have a lot of like very, romantic passion for like the actual base craft, and then we can get into like the business implications. But it's the same thing, right? Like where I was at Orbit Metrics was I met a lot of people who were not, were very interested in one day fixing the messy thing of their data, which is like it's like cleaning out your garage or like some other major home improvement project. Like you need to do it, but you just have no interest in doing it right now because of like the money and how many other things are going on in your life. But they're like, keep me in touch. Like, let me know. Like, that's something I do want to do. And again, you could say I was naive because I was new to sales, and people are like, oh, I'm definitely interested. Just reach out in the future. But half the time they are genuine. Like a lot of people came back 17 months later and said, all right, this data thing's an effing problem. If I don't fix it soon, like we're going to have an issue. And a newsletter is the perfect way to just like loosely stay top of mind with all of those people indefinitely.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're hitting on a lot of the points that draw me to it as well. I've had a personal blog and like a roughly monthly newsletter as far as I've taken it for over a decade now. And I can't tell you the number of random connections and outreaches and cool things that it's led to that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And both it's led to people I've been able to hire, like employees have come through it. Partners. I sold part of one of my businesses once through it. Like, it's just like all these random little things that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And I agree. It's like the nice thing about it versus social media is it's a channel that you more than social media truly own the distribution and control of. LinkedIn, I'm a slave to their algorithm, essentially. Like, I know that their algorithm doesn't like me to post links, so I don't post links on LinkedIn, and that's, there's hacks around it with the comments and all that stuff. But like, even so, like we all have these like things we have to do to stay in good with the LinkedIn gods. Emails, like not like that. Ideally, you are able to stay in the inboxes if people are actually reading it and you're continuing to drive high quality content, because there's not this like extra layer. Now, obviously, there's spam filters and all sorts of like, newsletter tabs now, and all that's kind of changed, but I still think it's more heavily owned by you and then the user than other forms for sure. We've talked a couple times about growth of agencies. And so you mentioned, with Orbit Marketing, there's been kind of the ability to grow it a little more systematically, let's say. What's working? I always like to ask people this, like, what so far has worked for you all when it comes to growth? And maybe what isn't working if you've tried some things that just haven't paid off yet?
Yeah, I've got an ability to speak for a long time about what hasn't worked, for sure. Because a lot of things haven't worked. And I've done plenty of AARs, after action reports, trying to prevent the same types of mistakes, right? I think every problem, a lot of people think that I'm very, very big on trying to not draw the wrong conclusions from things, right? So for example, like just, the word resolution, like it's a low resolution conclusion would be, I've tried to hire salespeople and they didn't work. Therefore, hiring salespeople doesn't work.
Right. Yep.
I think all I can really rule out is that, to some extent. And so also, I think the ultimate example of this is like, I've hired a person from this country and they were not a good employee. Therefore, I'm never hiring from that country again. It's like, okay, there's a lot of people who, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm going to hire over, like everyone's like the Philippines, right? That's the best example where it's like hire overseas in the Philippines. There's a lot of people who've built a lot of successful businesses with a lot of Filipino talent. But it's like, you've made one hire from someone maybe who was, and this is the main conclusion I'm getting at, is like, all we can really conclude either is that one, this wasn't the right person, maybe, and you still can't necessarily conclude that because like if you had the better training, there's really two conclusions I've taken from this. One is the preparedness of you for them in that role. So for example, if I can't tell you, here's exactly what I do to get customers, do 100 of these, follow this procedure 100 times, you will get at least 10 calls. And then it's up to me whether or not those calls close, but that's at least step one. And then number two is, okay, maybe we can't solve this problem for this price, right? Maybe a $20 per hour employee can't take a unproven sales process. It's like, and so the other thing is like, I think, a lot of agency gurus, if you like agency gurus, meaning people who make material for agency owners on how to grow, always talk about the importance of founder-led sales. Like if you can't figure out your sales process as the founder, like good luck. Like if I had, $10 million in the bank and I could spend $500,000 a year on like a sales leader, like that guy could probably figure out how to go get customers for me. So it's like, I could solve the problem for, I don't know, what is that? $250 an hour. I just don't have the $250 an hour to give to that problem. So I have to solve it myself. But that's been some very failed experiments, are trying to outsource, sales, marketing, lead gen too early or too inexpensively. And then when I say too early, I mean just because we don't have the pieces figured. That's basically, it's like, if you don't know how to do the thing, unless you're hiring a true, properly priced expert, they're not going to successfully take over the thing from you. And then what has been working is, relationships. That's definitely been my strength since day one, is like, I came into this business having done the podcast for 3.5 years, right? So 200 episodes of an episode every single week. So just so many people that I built very genuine relationships with through the podcast. When I like just, hey, wanted to let you know I'm doing this thing. Is that interesting to you or anyone that you know? Like a very low pressure sales message, and something I've done a lot that like, and I don't want to call it cheeky, but it is somewhat cheeky because it's cheeky because you can always say it's true maybe when it shouldn't be, but just throwing in certain words of like asking for someone's feedback rather than asking if they'd like to be a customer. It's like, just you're trying to get the idea in front of the person who you want to get the idea in front of. And if you position it as feedback or it's a beta cohort or like something just lower stakes and experimental, it's kind of the classic, like, if you're on the side of the road and your car is broken down and people don't really come to help you, but then if you're pushing the car, like it's just getting people in on it. It's like getting them in on it. Like, hey, we're looking to get a few more testimonials for the site. Like, would you take a look at this? Like, oh, I'm getting to participate in something rather than just like buy something and give you money. And so those subtle tweaks helped a lot. And like, that's where a lot of the early business came from. And I launched this business around an industry, had some experience and credibility. Like I did work for some like big names in email. And so that kind of helps quite a bit. And then also I spent half of last year in Manhattan and I would just go to like I would do ground game. Like I would just do founder rug clubs and events. And just, we had at the time like a very low cost service. We're only charging for like almost our first full year, only $500 a month for a weekly newsletter. And which was just like no brainer pricing for people who are just like, people are happy to pay that much just to check the box of like, so many founders like, wow, I wish I know I should be doing something over email and I'm not. So just by like meeting founders and be like, we write newsletters. A lot of people are like, oh, damn, we need a newsletter. How much does it cost? I'm like, $500 a month. They're like, oh, wow, let's talk. And so just like having a no-brainer offer, the ops were challenging to like fulfill that well at that price point. So now we're kind of in a different game, but that was working really well for a long time. And then we also had quite a few white labelers because again, our prices were so low. So many other agencies were like, wait, so I can offer a newsletter. You'll do it for $500 a month and I can sell it for whatever.
For like, 2000. Yeah, totally.
And so that also worked well. Some good partners early on.
Interesting. There's a few things that resonate with me there. There's a book I read as I was starting my first agency called The Mom Test. And his sort of thesis in that I took away at least was that instead of asking people, when you have your early product or service, like, hey, would you buy this thing? Or could you, would you want to, use this at this price point or whatever? Ask them instead for a research call where you just ask them, how do you currently solve this problem? Is this even a problem? How much does it cost you a month? And so come at it not as a business owner trying to sell something, but as a student trying to research and learn the industry. So that's exactly what I did. I went out to 100 people that were in my potential target customer list. I tried to make connections with them and reached out. And instead of being like, hey, I want to sell you something, it was, hey, I'm just trying to learn about this space. I'm thinking about getting into developer relations, would love to, pick your brain for 30 minutes. And so many people say yes to that kind of call. And then many of those people became customers once I actually had an offering. But it was a fantastic way to warm them up, build relationships, immediately come in with they felt invested in this thing that I was building, because they were kind of part of it early on. Lots of advantages there. And then, the underpricing thing is interesting because I think my typical wisdom, right, is don't underprice yourself. But at the same time, how do you got to get started somehow. And there's something to be said for learning, essentially you're doing this service at a unsustainably low price just to learn. And that's okay. I think if you do it intentionally, you're going to have to sort of shift this over time and you don't try to you're right. You're probably too early to really learn how to scale it when you haven't figured out pricing yet. But at the same time, you still learn a ton from those early customers, even if they are cheap. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I think something too I was going to ask you about is the operations. You already mentioned this, you've been able to kind of pull yourself away from that side of things and you don't have to actually write the newsletters, you don't have to give me any secret sauce, but I'm curious, how do you write these, presumably dozens of newsletters at scale every week? How does that operationally happen?
Yeah, I mean, we did release the secret sauce, right? That's Orbit Flows is a lot of it. And now we're starting to put, it's a tool, but you have to have IP with the tool, right? And it's just the equivalent of there's Webflow, then there's a template gallery. Where it's if you're not a website designer, this tool is not super useful to you unless you drop in this thing that's mostly complete. And from day one, we've had, I don't even remember what it was called originally. You're technical. Originally, it was built in VS Code. So our first couple writers were had to teach them how to set up a virtual machine and SSH into VS Code to use a command line version of Orbit Flows before we built a real user interface. And then it was originally Orbit Tools for a long time, or it was Orbit App, I don't know. And then we decided to call it Orbit Flows. Every client's newsletter, right? Every systematized input, our main offer to this day is we will write your weekly newsletter. And usually a weekly newsletter has, a very consistent format. If it's a lot of news roundup, it's we'll find one story that's the most interesting or impactful from the past week, and that'll kind of be our spotlight where we really summarize the main points in a 350 word, here's what this means for you. Then maybe 2 to 3 pieces of less interesting but still very interesting news content, and then your quick bullets. Let's say it's a very standard format. So to do that, what's the process, right? You're going to aggregate a ton of information from a ton of sources related to this topic. You're going to curate from everything that you've aggregated, and then you will curate, kind of stack rank, which maps to which section, which is the most interesting, which is the least interesting, of still the 10 most interesting. And then you'll just do the copywriting of turn this into this, the transformation. And that's the same way the software is written, is for a curation newsletter, aggregate a bunch of things, automate that with web scraping, curate a bunch of things, right? Create a first draft curation with an AI ranking of here's what's most likely to be relevant based on what you've told me about this client and their target customer. And also, right, you've probably seeded it by the first few weeks with actual past examples, so it can tell what's similar. And then AI taking the first draft of here's the full text of this news article, turn it into a 1 point, this exact structure, right? A markdown heading 3 with a hyperlink to the source article that's kind of a bold, dramatic claim from the article that's not what's the word I'm looking for? Like an exaggerate. It's still truthful, but it's spun in such a way. And then, format it with this, like the takeaways, the main points, 3 statistics, etc. And so every client, for news clients, that's obviously what we're doing. And then there's a human in the loop at every step, right? Like, was this an accurate retelling of what was in the article? Was these a good selection of articles based on this client? Of course, we're like the ones tuning the research parameters at the beginning. And then on the other type of newsletters, like thought leadership, right? And what we do for thought leadership is we're still starting with a reference material. So whether we interview a client, and obviously that's something we can batch, but we interview a client and we have like a huge library of questions, and like it's not just enough to ask someone a question, you have to like provoke the question in such a way. It's like if you say, what are 3 wins that you have recently? And like maybe they don't have 3 that come to mind, but you say like, okay, if you're struggling to find them, like go to your email and search for this, or like do you have like, and you give them like 9 prompts to like help them actually answer the question better. But then it would be the same thing, like have a series of GPT prompts that are into orbit flows that are like very, very, very thorough of how to transcribe or turn a voice note into a great blog post in their voice. So past examples of their writing and things like that, and a lot of our own best practices. So operationally, in terms of writing the newsletters, there is a step-by-step workflow built within our own software for every client, with a very detailed client profile, with knowledge about their business and preferences and style guides and things like that saved on like a per client level that are based on how the software is built, like always added into every single prompt. And then of course we have, I think 6 full-time writers that do nothing but fulfill client work and account manage, that are making sure everything, is excellent top to bottom. And yeah, we have one head of fulfillment who maintains a ClickUp list that kind of self-populates with, I think it's custom code. It's a custom code in a make.com thing that like kind of keeps the custom cadences for like when to create new issues. And if the client wants to review their drafts on Wednesdays and they want 2 days to review their drafts before it goes out, like all those parameters programmed to get it in. And so there's the writers meet every morning, and I don't even know what goes on in their meeting. I've just been since day one. Like I wrote newsletters for like 2 or 3 months, and then Ethan led the fulfillment team, and then I've just still been on team sales, marketing, and to some extent product, but all fulfillment's been them. So they meet every morning. We use something called Gather, if you've heard of it, gather.hq, virtual office software. It's kind of like almost like a Pokemon style video game. And so I see like all the writers go to one room in there, have a little meeting every morning, make sure everything is on time, and then we use something called Clearfeed. I don't know if you've heard of Clearfeed.
No,
Clearfeed's big. Clearfeed turns every Slack message that's in a client channel into like a proper ticketing system. And so we have like an external to Slack record of all Slack messages. If a client's gone more than 8 hours without a message, like there's an automation to bring that back to the queue. And so we have a scorecard of like average response time and things like that. But like whoever's assigned to Clearfeed that day, like is going to, it's like closing down a restaurant. Like you can't close out the restaurant without this checklist. So whatever head of client fulfillment is, unless someone's like out that day or on vacation, like the person substituting for them, make sure Clearfeed has like 0 open tickets. Even if that just means like, hey, so sorry we missed this today, we'll have an answer for you as soon as we can tomorrow, just so there's no periods of total silence. So a lot of accumulated things like that.
Yeah, you guys have done a good job operationalizing this whole thing, and I'm not surprised, given you and Ethan both with the software backgrounds. Like I feel like my business partner and I are kind of similar in that we're both very automation and operational, repeatable, like document stuff focused, and a lot of founders are not like that. There's the other archetype, which is much more like free flowing and creative and non-structured, and that can be good. It has other strengths, but I think it is really interesting to hear all this, because that was one of my big focuses early at draft.dev when we started. That was like, how can we make this process very repeatable and scalable to build this technical content, which other people say is really hard to do. And it's like, if we can take something other people say is hard to do and make it repeatable and relatively scalable, that's got to be worth something long term, and it's got to be something that we can sell over and over. So yeah, that's cool. Louis, we talked a bit about the highs of entrepreneurship, the advantages, right? Like, hey, you get time freedom, you get like really fulfilling work. You can just, if you need to sleep a lot, you can sleep a lot. That's cool. But what's been tough about it? I mean, obviously it's not all roses every day.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of challenges for sure. I think you just have to remind yourself it's very easy, again, to adjust to like the nice aspects of the lifestyle that like you, again, don't see them anymore and you don't appreciate them anymore, which makes the very visible challenges seem relatively. So like I'll frequently take myself through the exercise of like remembering like what aspects of non-entrepreneurship I wouldn't have, or I'm gonna confuse this, like what the counterfactual or the life that isn't this way, like the parts of that I'm not appreciating. Like I can list like there's a million downsides. I just don't want to, if I list them in such a way, like I still remind myself that the balance is pretty good overall.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, arbitrary constraints are quite good. Like as bad as the school system is, like you probably do learn a lot more. Most people do learn net more through it than not, because it just like someone's holding you to finish when it's not fun. It's like, the completion rate for self-paced online courses, you kind of just like get what you need and move on, but it's what you think you need, right? So it's like, there's something I had a coach in one of these programs I went through say something like, I asked him like, I joined the program, I'm more advanced than their average student. I'm not saying I'm their best student ever, but it's for like a lot of beginners. And so I'm not a beginner, I'm intermediate, let's say. And I was like, where do you think I should watch the curriculum? He's like, I think you should specifically watch these modules and these modules, but like for the most part, just follow the Yellow Brick Road. And so I've just been kind of like using that as like an acronym, like YBR, Yellow Brick Road, where, I couldn't tell you the last time I successfully Yellow Brick Road an online course, right? And it's like, we don't know what we don't know. And like, I bought this because the guy who made it has gone further than I have in this specific thing. But because I don't have to, or because what am I accountable to? Am I actually going to finish this thing? And so there's sometimes this like absence of constraints that can be damaging, or like can prevent you from like really accumulating anything meaningful in terms of like skills and things like that. Like, do you stop when it gets difficult and then just go repeat the pattern again and stop when that gets difficult, versus like what holds you to persevere on something not immediately essential, versus you can just paper cut your way over the problem with some short-term fix. For example, like the easiest way to solve any problem is just like throw your time as the solution, which obviously becomes an issue quite quickly. So yeah, I mean, and some downsides, like I've moved, like I haven't really, because I have the total location freedom, like I haven't really planted much roots since I've graduated. I've spent some time in Arizona to like live with Sean and build a business and get that off the ground. But then once he got into a serious relationship and we stopped living together, I didn't have as much of a reason to be there like day to day. So I've kind of bounced around a few times since then. So a lot of like, again, the personal life stuff, it's just very easy to neglect because, and how to manage the psychology. Like I think it's like maybe it's the number one most important skill in business besides having like good business strategy, is just having good psychology around it. Because you can have, again, if you have terrible psychology, but you're building Facebook in 2005, then it's like, you don't really need to show up in a good mood every day. But if you're pre-product market fit or pre-explosive growth channels, like just if things are at risk for any reason besides just like extreme outlier growth, managing your psychology day to day is very critical. So it's just the softer aspects.
Yeah, I would say like I totally empathize with all those and felt all those same things. I would say that my experience is like, if you want to be an entrepreneur for long term, like 10, 20, 30 years, whatever your long term is, but like long term, you will experience extreme highs and extreme lows, as far as like you're going to have great years where you think you're a genius, you're on top of the world, you make a lot of money. You're going to have shit years where you're going to lose a lot of money. And like bar none, every entrepreneur I've met who's done this for 20 plus years has had real highs and real lows. So I agree with you. Your point is like managing your own psychology through the highs and the lows, being able to take the highs and not get too big headed about it and, sort of naive to thinking you know it all, or taking the lows and not, being down in a ditch somewhere. Like both of those things are equally important, because it's just staying in the game long enough is the key. Because you ride this out 20 years and you'll eventually get lucky and have your Facebook moment to whatever extent is possible in your market. But like, yeah, I think that's a really good insight. And that's something too that I constantly have to remind myself of, is like, yes, there's highs and there's lows, but also I'm not having to go back to report to a boss about, why I did this thing or that thing. The open-endedness is hard though. I remember I've said this a lot on this show, and I say it to other entrepreneurs who are new at this. One of the hardest things for me in the early days was not having a boss to say, hey, is this a good idea? Or, should I be doing this or this? There's nobody up the chain. I mean, you can go build your own mentor network and coaches and advisors. I think all those people have good roles, but there's ultimately every decision comes down to you're responsible for the outcome and what happens. So it's a different way of living, but it's certainly got its upsides as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Shelving certain questions, so you're not reevaluating everything every day, is like a very important, like, there's a whole conversation of what the actual, like spelling that out for you, like spelling it out for yourself. Like earlier, something I think that's super valuable And like another challenge is the difficulty of not forgetting what it is that you're doing. So like we'll very quickly say things like, well, with email, you own your audience, with LinkedIn, you don't. And that's why email's better. People are like, huh? Like that doesn't, like, so people hear that, it doesn't mean anything to them. Like you said all of the right things, but like you have to spell everything out. Like when you post, let's say you have 500 people on LinkedIn, when you post it, somewhere between 5 and 50 people will probably see it. And that is not good. If you go on an email and you have 500 people on your list, it's probably going to end up in 500 inboxes, and probably 300 people are going to open it. And that's true every single day, like rain or shine. And you can, and so that's like I have to remind myself when I'm marketing or things of like, yeah, you have a newsletter, it's great, you nurture your prospects on autopilot, blah, 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 blah. And like, boom. And that's just not persuasive to someone who's not living and breathing this every day. So like, I think, anyone listen to this of like what it means to like manage your own psychology, like you have to really spell that out in terms of like all of the things that is. It's because like to your point, it like, make sure the highs are highs. Like what does it mean to not? I think one example is like spending money very frivolously is very, very, very easy to do. It's like, oh, well, there's a lot of money coming in. It's like this person that's not super effective. We don't know exactly what they're doing. Like, well, I don't want to replace them and I don't want to fire them for no reason. But it's like, let's just keep them around. And like the amount of accumulated expenses is like one of the major like decision-making aspects. Then to your point of like, manager and the open-endedness of decisions, the hardest thing I think is putting boundaries around your decisions every day. Like this is a question I'm not, because otherwise you'll stew on this. Like someone on your team submits one thing that's kind of below your expectations for them, and then you're like ready to fire them on the spot. And it's like, okay, well, like maybe not. Like I'm not going to evaluate like this person unless it's like a real red flag versus just, I don't know, they were tired that day. Like I can't think about this again for a month. Like I'm going to put this on a list of things to think about in a month versus now every single day, because you choose not to fire them in the moment, you're still thinking about firing them every single day. It's like, just, I'm not going to think about this for a month. Or like this thing, like you're doing a cold email campaign and you're testing out a new market and it doesn't get leads within 5 days. And you're like, all right, killing that experiment versus like, no. Like I'm going to let that run for a month before. So just like every decision around to not re-question every tiny decision every single day, and to actually put boundaries around how long you're going to go without checking on a thing is one of probably the most, I guess, actionable components of what it means to manage your psychology.
I think that's a really good example, a really good way of thinking of it. I know a lot of founders get into this never-ending loop of chasing hacks, and that's exactly what it looks like. It's like, oh, I sent 100 cold emails and nobody converted, so this doesn't work. And then I tried content. I wrote 3 blog posts and nobody read them, and that doesn't work. And it's like, okay, well, it's like none of these experiments were long enough to give you anything decisive. You're in a competitive, loud market. Like, of course, it's going to take time. Like, so yeah, you're right. Like building yourself some guardrails and having the self-discipline. I think this is kind of like, we've sort of edged around this topic of discipline, but it seems like you have a high degree of sort of self-discipline here. And that's probably part of your X factor as an entrepreneur. Like you're able to kind of push these constraints for yourself and live within them. And like some people just can't live that way for whatever reason. So I think, again, we've all got our strengths, but that's one thing. Last question I wanted to ask for you, Louis, is about books, because I always like asking people and building my reading list. Any books that you recommend to entrepreneurs or that have stood out to you in the last year or two?
Last year or two, I might have to either pull up the Goodreads or pull up the shelf. What if I'm starting to like either crushes books or doesn't get through and like getting things very quickly. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. This is the same exact thing of like, once you have knowledge, you don't appreciate, how game-changing it was when you first appreciated it. And then also contextualizing things for you, Karl. Like I think, in many ways you're obviously ahead in terms of like you've built the content agency. Now you're kind of like firmly in like the next step of the agency. So it's like a lot of things, what I think you might enjoy versus what as a beginner, like I can, like there's a lot of books I'm very glad that I read.
Here's how I like to do it, because I agree with your points. Like you're totally right. Like
if I told you read a book about delegation, like I think you figured out that delegation's important. Like you've told me a lot of things that make me believe you've solved that problem by now.
Books I read 6 years ago, I go back and reread them. I go, this is terrible. Like, why did I like this so much 6 years ago? It's like your life changes. The way I like to think about this is, what stood out to you at your stage in your journey? So let's make it personal. Don't make it a recommendation for me. It's like somebody listening to this who's at a similar stage to you. They've got, they've started a business. They're kind of figuring things out. What's something that has resonated with you in the last year or two that's really helped you kind of either get through a roadblock for yourself or kind of shifted your thinking, anything like that?
Not super recent in retrospect. And that's another aspect of like managing your psychology, is like zooming out. And like one of the things, maybe we're not at the revenue milestone we thought would be January 1st of this year. But I think like what is different about January 1 of this year compared to January 1 of last year? And one of those things was like January 1 of last year, we were 3 people, and January 1 of this year, we were 15 people. So it's like, in theory, you should be able to move a lot faster, have a much bigger impact, a lot more time to like, that should be a exponential difference, not just a 5x difference in terms of outcomes. And so that gives me peace. And I think the reason that we did that was reading, again, getting everyone on my team. And to your point of like books and timing, right? Like someone recommended that book to me, Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, like 3 years ago. And I was like, I don't have money to hire anyone for anything. Like, what, this book's very not relevant yet. And when we were actually reading it at the right point in time, and I got all of my business partners to also read it, then it really, we were like, all right, we're on team delegation. Like, and so that's when we built out the writing team and did a number of things. I think I'm not like through that. Like, there's a lot of things I'm still doing that I shouldn't. Yeah. So that was like one of the things that gives me the most peace in the past years. Like, we used to be solo for a long time, and like that obviously was going to have its upper limits that we were very squarely running into. And now we're not afraid of hiring again. And it's not like we never tried to hire anyone before that book. We tried to hire a few people unsuccessfully, gave us some burn marks. And so we had a lot of hesitation around hiring again. Then that got us over like the fear of hiring again, and actually led to, several people who have now, I think we have like 4 people who are within a month of being with us for a full year. Right. So it's like, we've found some people who fit and have like solved important roles and also grown significantly. So that feels so distant now in terms of like, if every month is a year in business, that like, or maybe every quarter is a year. If every quarter is a year in business, that it's like 4 quarters ago, 5 quarters ago. So it's like, oof. But you told me past year or 2. So that's like the only one that really stands out recently with like a real concrete outcome.
Yeah. Buy Back Your Time. Yeah. That's a good one. I can't remember if I've read that or if I just have had that recommended before, but yeah, that I agree. This, like, you're right. You have to have enough. There's like a hierarchy of problems in order to start buying back your time. The first one is you have to have enough demand to actually build up enough like cash flow that you can actually hire people. And like, that's sometimes the challenge people have. Other times it's more like they just mentally can't let go of things, in which case that's a problem you can work on, very internally. It's a shift in thinking.
I did pull out the Goodreads to find some better answers as well that are more recent that I just forgot about. I enjoyed Andrew Wilkinson's book.
Yeah, I did as well.
Because I didn't know he actually came up in the agency game. Like, I didn't know that at all. But just reading that was really cool to like have a modern story that felt accessible. And then I really liked Richer, Wiser, Happier, less so a business book. Built to Sell is another really good one about like productizing your agency and about the scalability side of it. And then I had one other one here. I don't know. That was probably it. Was Built to Sell.
His podcast is really interesting too. If you and I haven't listened to it in a while. I used to listen to it regularly, and they kind of, the stories are all pretty similar, but like hearing these stories from business owners who have sold is pretty interesting because you get a wide variety of experiences, good and bad. And so it's a pretty good listen. Cool. Well, Louis, this has been fun. Where can people find out about Orbit and all the things you guys are doing? What's the easiest way?
Yeah, we have our newsletter. Orbitmarketing.io has links to it. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well, personally. That's Louis Shulman. We have our podcast, the Orbit Marketing Podcast, on YouTube, or it's also on Substack for people who want to get email notifications about it. Those are the main things and the main places.
Awesome. Thanks, Louis. I appreciate it and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.